Good morning, everybody. I feel like I'm in a room full of friends. I know quite a few of you, and we've done many things together. Even the book that Lal refers to, a lot of you had a hand in that. Great reviews, great forwards, and many friends. And obviously, Nicola, you and I go back a very long way. One of the things I talk about in the book is start your day with rest and end your day with rest. So I'm quite intentional about mindfulness. And that's a lesson I picked up, John, when you were at UCT GSB 20 years ago, actually. I did an MDP course there. And you took us through mindfulness and reflection and intentionality. So this morning I arrived here at 8:30, parked my car, sat in the car, and what did I do? Mindfulness. And breathing exercises, thinking about what it is that I want to talk about today. And at 9 o'clock, Lyle calls me and says, "Ellie, where are you?" I said, "Lyle, I'm in the car, mindfulness." He's all worried, you're supposed to be here, we're supposed to check your process, your mic you. I said, all of that takes a minute. But the reason I do this is because I don't believe in PowerPoint slides. I believe in authentic conversations. And that's the role of business schools, to facilitate conversations that shape the world. When we talk about universities, we talk mostly about foundational knowledge building, teaching people skills, equipping them with the right skills to get into the world of work and impact society. But when we think about the role of business schools, we think largely about this one very important question, the what if question. So I spent many years, like many of you, talking about the VUCA world. And while we're grappling with that, there was the bunny world. And we think the bunny world is right now, is happening now. We're in the what if world. My submission is the VUCA world and the bunny world has an element of being a victim. The world is happening to us. We're dealing with uncertainty. We're dealing with volatility. And what are we going to do about it? Whereas if you transition to the what-if world, you're reminding yourself of your inner agency to shape the world, to shape your agenda. Challenges are a given, whatever happens to us, but we cannot shift that. What you can control is how you show up and what vision you want to paint and the legacy you want to create. So I have a challenge for the world of work, and I have a challenge and a provocation for business schools, which is let's rethink what we know about strengths and weaknesses in development areas. In fact, I think those terms are misleading. So my passion and my obsession is to create a movement that says strengths are the things you love, the things you're good at, the things that give you energy, and the things you should spend most of your time on. Development areas are the things you have a crush on, the skills you wish you had, your aspirations. Now, what I think we should be doing in the world is focusing people on their strengths and their aspirations, and forget about weaknesses. Weaknesses are the shadow of strengths. What Lyle loves and is passionate about, Morris might hate. So in the conventional wisdom, we would say that's a strength and a weakness. So Lyle, what you hate, you have no business giving any attention or time to. And Morris, what you love might be the shadow of his strengths. So we need to complement each other and collaborate. That's what I love about collaboration. I work for multinationals, and the single biggest issue we had was silos. Every organization today battles with silos because human beings forget that collaboration trumps competition. We're interconnected, our humanity is connected, our destinies are connected, yet we forget to collaborate. And what we used to say at companies like Unilever, for example, was, what if Unilever knew what Unilever knows? We would be the most formidable company. So what if African business schools knew what African business schools know? That only happens through knowledge sharing, integration, collaboration, internalization, internationalization. So the conversations you're having this week, as important as they are, they're not unique. I've just come back from spending a couple of days at Oxford Said Business School, where I was invited alongside a whole lot of other Oxford academics to speak to a group of 42 world leaders and business leaders from 25 different countries, all continents represented. The agenda is entirely the same as this agenda here. AI, rise of technology, the SDG goals. I was speaking about Africa's Agenda 2063 and how technology can help with that, and the whole notion of Africa's digital renaissance. We're speaking about equity, equality, diversity. We're talking about peace in the world. We're talking about geopolitics, all the things that keep us up at night, because all of us are facing the same challenges and the same constraints. But the challenge is to get ourselves to a position where we imagine a different world by asking the question, what if? The company I work for was started by 2 PhD students at Stanford who were studying computer science. And the question that they asked was, what if we indexed the world's information and indexed all the websites and put it together and made it universally accessible and helpful? And that's how Google Search was founded. And of course, other products like YouTube. What if we gave people a platform to share all the knowledge that they know for the benefit of society? And that's how YouTube was started. Now, the question we normally ask in business schools is, what keeps business leaders up at night? What keeps politicians up at night? What keeps shareholders up at night? What keeps society up at night? Now, that's not a difficult question to answer, because the things that we're talking about today, which is stability in the world, peace in the world, prosperity for everybody, all those things are things that we're all trying to solve in one way or another. And if I look at what the World Economic Forum 2024 says about the state of the world today, we need not look any further than the SDG goals. 80% of the Sustainable Development Goals are off track. And we in Africa, we're making great progress in the area of clean water and sanitation, safe, renewable and accessible and affordable energy. We're making good progress in more sustainable communities, less and less people living in squalor. We're also making great strides in terms of climate action and driving the blue ocean economy and so on. But in the economic SDGs, we are lagging behind. Jonathan spoke about the fact that South Africa is the face of income inequality in the world with a Gini coefficient of 64%. Now that has to change. It can't be that we stare at and admire. We have to deal decisively with inequality. So when I look at what's troubling the world today, is that there's a massive sense of uncertainty, the trust deficit, whether we're talking about governments, we're talking about businesses, we're talking about leaders in society today. And it is no coincidence that we find ourselves with the largest and the oldest liberation movement on the continent facing defeat for the first time in 30 years of power, and that's the ANC. And if you read everything that's been written about the rise and fall of liberation movements, is that they do have a shelf life and they do die out at some point. And the single biggest issue is the loss of focus from what really matters to society and really focusing on survival. So there's 2 predominant mindsets that we teach in business schools is playing to win or avoiding losing mentality. And what you're finding, by and large, with many liberation movements is that they tend to be thinking about survival. They're thinking about how to avoid loss. And that's why populism raises hate. That's why there's a sense of let's hoard what we have. Whereas if you're playing to win, you believe in a world of abundance, you believe in a world of getting equity achieved in the world through growth. And that's why this tension between socialism and capitalism is so important, because both have a role to play. But also if you look at the biggest political systems in the world, there are nations that have thrived in the absence of a clear-cut democratic choice. And what you're finding is that there's a crucible of ideas that's actually building up here, and that's the central role of our business schools today. How do we create a platform where we have the right kinds of conversations to enable people to shape the world that we all deserve? So if I look at the single biggest yardstick of kind of progress today is a nation's ability and appetite and competence in leaning into digital technology. The single biggest unlock for economic prosperity today is digital technology. We've seen that to achieve any form of exponential growth, nations have to define themselves as digital sprinters. We as Google think about this concept called digital sprinters framework, which has 4 aspects to it. One is the competitive or regulatory landscape. How do nations come up with the right environment to encourage investment, to have fair competition laws in place, and to really drive a sense of governments that are equipped to deal with technology, governments that embrace things like e-government, governments that are thinking about reducing cost to serve so that the majority of the benefit goes to service delivery as opposed to sustaining these massive bureaucracies. The second aspect of digital sprinters framework is human capital. So how do we invest in education? How do we improve education outcomes? How do we develop future leaders for society that are thinking about growth, that are thinking about innovation, that are thinking about 100-year plans as opposed to immediate consumption? So the only way for us to be driving responsible production, responsible consumption, is to focus on the self. How do we ensure that every leader that walks out of a business school cares more about serving a higher purpose than about themselves? How do we create a world where everybody can see prosperity, can see a future, where everybody feels seen? When we say sawubona, we actually mean, yes, we do see you. And it's not just a trite thing to say or a polite thing to say, but it inherently means that everybody has a fair chance of success. And the third aspect of Digital Aspirations framework is investment in technology and infrastructure. We've made great strides in Africa in that space. We've got a population of 1.3 billion people in Africa. 23% of the world's youth resides in Africa. By 2050, our population will be 2.5 billion people. 500 million Africans are on the net today. By 2030, there'll be another 300 million Africans on the net. Now, for that to happen, we need to build infrastructure, we need to increase broadband connectivity, we need to improve our compute capability as a continent, we need to ensure that systemic barriers to internet connectivity are reduced, device prices, data prices, regulation that promotes the release of in-demand spectrum, curriculums that embrace not just R, but the 5IR, because what's really important there is the role of humanity in this ecosystem. We're not just talking about interconnected systems and devices, which was the preoccupation of 4IR, but the big difference in 5IR, as we all know, is the role of the human. We don't want to live in a world where everything is so efficient and automated that humans have no role to play. We're also very wary of the paper-clip syndrome, where if you let AI just do whatever it wants, it becomes completely autonomous, and you program a large language model to produce the highest number of paper clips in the world, and you give it autonomy over the steel resources in the world, it will not stop producing paper clips. We'll never have steel left in the world if that happens. So there are real dangers to the sexy notion of AI, which is the last part of the Digital Aspirations framework, which is investing in technology and adopting technology. Now, we all know that AI holds a lot of promise for us as society, and for the longest time, we held on to Moore's law that says technology doubles in efficacy every 2 years, but I don't need to tell you that is not the case anymore. It's happening at a much faster rate, and that's why all of us at some point this year have said, where is this year going to? That's because of the rate of change. And because it's happening subliminally, we as humans are trained to try and keep it going on this hamster wheel, but we never actually sit down and say, we are dealing with way too much. How do I keep a sense of serenity? How do I keep a sense of calm? How do I keep a sense of perspective when I'm constantly juggling all these things? So as we think about the deployment of AI, which is a much needed tool to really transform society and accelerate economic prosperity across the world and move the dial when it comes to SDG goals, we have to think about the fact that every privilege comes with a responsibility. So what does responsible AI mean? We're all familiar with ethical AI, but I think it's important that AI systems are built with safety in mind, respect for privacy, there has to be accountability, there has to be room for feedback, and we know that these systems aren't perfect, they hallucinate. Some of us who work for tech companies lose a little bit of market cap when these systems hallucinate and we feel it in the share price, and so on and so forth. And I think it's important that AI, in its development, in its progress, respects scientific rigor, scientific discovery, and there's a sense of validation and accountability built into it. And I think when we look at the fact that half of the world's population today, 2.5 billion people, about 60 countries, are facing a national election of some sort. And the role of social media platforms and technology when it comes to really advancing democracies by making information available to people, but not just information, credible, verifiable information. So the biggest enemy today to democracies, as we know, misinformation, disinformation, propagation of bias and prejudice, and how do we ensure that this amazing technology called AI does not propagate those things, does not find itself on the wrong side of history as we roll out these very impressive initiatives. So when we cast our eye on what does Africa need to get right for Africa to achieve the AU's very aspirational 2063 agenda titled The Africa We Want. The Africa we want, very simply, is Africa that's at peace with itself. So we ought to silence the guns. We need stability in Africa. We need economic prosperity in Africa. We need regional integration. And we need every African to have a sense of hope that they can indeed prosper. We need sustainable communities. We need prosperous communities. We need financial systems. We need collaboration between countries, between nation states. And if you contrast that with the SDG goals, you'll find many strong parallels. Today, when we look at what Africa needs to do to really leapfrog, is that Africa, first and foremost, has to define this vision, which is the Africa we want. How do we get business schools to align with this vision? How do we produce the kind of people that make this vision a reality? And a couple of things come to mind. Technology today has the potential to really capacitate everybody, but if we don't realize the role that a human being plays in making sure that technology drives equality in the world, we will have the same issues going on for ages and ages going forward. So what gives me a lot of confidence is when I look at the partnerships between technology and business schools and universities around the world in driving research. If we take the area of education, for example, where we know that we face many issues on the continent, from things as early childhood development. Only about 67% of the kids in this country are exposed to early childhood development. Now that's the foundation. And if we look at access to education, 9 million African children won't have access to education, girl children that is. And 6 million boy children won't have access to education in Africa, and that's according to UNESCO. If I look at the dropout rate below the ages of 12 in Africa, it's about 20%. If you look at the youth, it's about 40%. Adult literacy, which is really important in driving the Africa we want. Africa is sitting at about 67%. In the US, you got about 85% literacy rate. In the UK, 98% literacy rate. And if I look at pupil-teacher ratio in our schools, UNESCO tells us that we need to have about at least 20 pupils to a teacher. Many of our African nations are 30 and above. How do we get to a point where we actually fix that? We have an issue of conflict on the continent that's resulted in child-headed households. And we also have an issue where we have a lot of single-parent households in many parts of the continent. How do we ensure that we are still able to deliver the right quality education into every household, into every home, when kids aren't able to get to school? And that's where online education comes in. But also, how do we personalize education so that we indeed meet kids where they are? And how do we ensure that with Education 4.0, we are developing citizens of the world that will be democratic in their orientation, i.e. equality for all, but two, we'll be thinking about how do you create sustainability into the long run as opposed to irresponsible consumption. How do we ensure that things like ESG do not become a pipe dream, but everybody's thinking about the sustainable world around them? And how do we ensure that capitalism is for the broader good as opposed to just the elite few? I think partnerships between business schools and technology companies can really come to light when it comes to unearthing some of these solutions. And there's a couple of things happening there. If we think about the fact that 60% of the world's children population cannot read for meaning, how do we improve educational outcomes? And technology can help in that space. We've got a tool called Read Along, which is web-based, app-based tool that helps children read. It's an AI-based tool where a child reads into this tool, and the tool gives the child feedback. There's a tutor on the tool called Dia who reads along with them, corrects them, and helps them. And that's just one thing, because you have to think about people living with disabilities and how that disenfranchises them. We've got a lot of tools there, Project Relate, where about 480 million people in the world suffer from some sort of speech impediment or deficiency. We've got an AI tool where if you record at least 500 phrases into this tool, it gives you your own personalized language recognition tool that coaches you, helps you, but also transcribes and translates what you say. And once it recognizes your voice, it can now start sending commands, whether to Siri, Google Assistant, or communicate with people around you. We also have tools that transcribe what you're saying to people. We have tools that help suffering from vision impairments, whether that's blindness or reduced vision. This tool in your Android phone with your camera facing out, it can basically narrate to you what's happening around you, obstacles in your way, communicate people. And of course, if you're deaf, we also have tools that actually translate sound into text for you, guiding you along. And all those things are possible if we come together and research and come up with ideas, because this is the crucible of ideas. If I look at some of the stuff that we're doing in the healthcare space, we're training large language models on millions and millions of images so that we're able to improve, let's say, things like retina scans, where I think it's about 450 million people in the world suffer from diabetes. And the single biggest cause of blindness in the world, as we know, is diabetic retinopathy. Now, we've trained these models to be able to pick up these scans, and we can scan thousands and thousands of these things and be able to pick up causes of blindness. And these are things that, if detected early, can be avoided. We're looking at something similar when it comes to lung cancer, where we can now screen thousands and thousands of these scans. Same applies to mammography. Unfortunately, 1 in 7 women will be diagnosed with breast cancer at some point. And now we've got millions of these scans where we're able to help communities. But I think it's also important to look at things like affordability. If you look at how do you improve infant mortality rate and so on, we have now partnered with education institutions to look at how do you create affordable ultrasound scans? How do you train primary health care givers in administering these scans to pregnant ladies who cannot get to clinics and hospitals and so on and so forth? If I look at the migration of malaria-carrying mosquitoes and how we're using technology to be able to detect those through computer vision and so on, and how we're using things like autonomous drones to deliver medication to remote areas around Africa. So all these things are as a result of partnerships between private institutions as well as education institutions. Another thing which really excites me is Google's DeepMind's discovery of AlphaFold. Now, AlphaFold is a very important discovery in the fight against disease, in the development of drugs, in the fight against drug resistance. What we're doing there is that we've developed this AI system that's been able to improve the precision of protein structure predictions. So to be able to develop drugs and fight disease, you have to really be good at predicting protein structures. A typical PhD student takes about 2 years to predict one protein structure and probably spends about $200,000 on that. We have predicted all known 200 million protein structures just through amino acid sequencing. And through that, we're able to make this open source database of 200 million protein structure predictions to about 2 million scientists around the world that are helping people from nations that add up to about 500 million citizens. So just by doing that, you're able to expose all this scientific discovery to people who need it very quickly so we can accelerate the discovery of new drugs. So all these things are at the intersection of collaboration. Nobody can do them alone. And that's where business schools come in. So when we talk about the need to improve things like basic literacy and also elevate regard for STEM education, that is at the heart of driving progress when it comes to these 17 SDG goals. The World's Digital Readiness Index looks at where we are across the world when it comes to leaning into technology. There's about 146 countries that are indexed in this survey. The top 10 countries include the US, the UK, Luxembourg, those kind of countries. But the number one country when it comes to digital readiness is Singapore. 200 years ago, Singapore was a small little fishing village of 2,000 inhabitants. But through visionary leadership, Singapore is number one in the world. Unfortunately for us as a continent, there's only 2 countries that are in the top 60, with Mauritius sitting at 38 and Botswana at 58. South Africa is sitting at about 77. I think Kenya's 102, Nigeria 105. Now, what does Digital Readiness Index look like? Access to basic services, investment in infrastructure, the startup landscape, how are we investing in small businesses? Small businesses are 99% of businesses in Africa. In this country, small businesses employ about 55% of our population and make up 38% of GDP. The fourth aspect that we look at there is adoption of technology. Fifth aspect is ease of doing business. Are we creating the right environmental framework for businesses to lean in, invest, to thrive, and so on and so forth? And if you look at all these key measures, we are making strides here and there, I wouldn't lie. If I look at digital infrastructure in Africa, we've really made strides. We've introduced quite a few subsea cables to bring faster, reliable internet access onto the continent. That's growing economies, that's traveling internet speeds, that will, in the fullness of time, reduce data costs by about 20% or so and create jobs. We're also building many more data centers. But the World Bank tells us that by 2025, Africa will need about $100 billion to do a couple of things. The first thing is 80% of that money will go into extending broadband connectivity so that we don't just have 500 million Africans out of 1.3 billion on the net, but we have everybody represented on the net. Adjacent to that will be about 250,000 4G base stations. Now, we need to get to at least 4G, 5G devices for everybody to really enjoy the internet and get the best out of it, and for e-government to become a possibility, and for the cost of doing business, the cost of serving, to really come down. We need about 250,000 kilometers of fiber, and we need another 100 data centers to increase bandwidth, to reduce latency, to drive connectivity, to really upweight our compute capability, which is needed for research. So all of you that have AI departments in your business schools, you know how expensive those supercomputers are. But that's the table stakes we need to get to, where everybody's capacitated to come up with these much needed solutions. And if I look at the last area of sustainability, which is climate change, and how are these private partnerships helping us in that? If I give you a typical example of what's happening with deforestation, Africa has the second most arable land in the world after Asia. 55% of the population in Africa is employed in agri, and about 280 million Africans are malnourished, yet 30% of the food in Africa goes to waste. 10% of South Africans, that's 6.3 million of us, go to bed hungry every night, yet 10 million tons of food gets wasted in this country. Surely technology can connect excess good quality food with hungry mouths. And if I look at the single biggest threat to food security, I guess, is deforestation, right? Because we cut all these trees for good reasons, for agriculture activity, for commercialization of property, for the exodus of people out of rural areas into urban centers and so on. And so these are really good reasons, but we also have a problem of illegal logging. If I look at the Amazon forests in South America, in Brazil to be specific, what we're doing there is we're taking resized Android phones and we're putting AI systems in them and we power them with solar, and we've trained these models on picking up the sounds of illegal deforestation, illegal logging, of the sounds of chainsaws and so on. And we connect them to the top of these trees, and as soon as illegal activity happens, they pick up the sound, they send a message to the authorities, and the police come and they stop deforestation. So just by doing that, you're able to hold on to your trees, which, as we know, trees are carbon sink of the world. They give us oxygen, but very importantly, they protect the soil from erosion. And if I look at what we're doing in the area of carbon emissions, we've got a project called Greenlight, which is aimed at reducing emissions on the roads. 35% of all emissions on roads happen at traffic lights because of that stop-go phenomenon. So what we're doing there is just by resequencing traffic lights, we're able to reduce congestions and traffic lights, and we're able to have cars free-flowing. And just by doing that, we've been doing some experiments in about 10 countries. We've been able to reduce carbon emissions by 30%. And what we're also doing with Google Maps is that we're not just connecting you from point A to point B in the fastest possible time, but we're also looking at the least carbon-intensive routes, 1.3 million metric tons of carbon emissions just from exhaust pipes. And then lastly, I'll tell you about what we're doing in the aviation industry. 35% of the carbon emissions of the aviation industry actually come from vapor trails. Vapor trails are clouds that are formed in the sky as a result of these fumes coming out of jet engines called contrails or vapor trails. And what they do is that they absorb heat that would otherwise evaporate. So we've used satellite imaging and satellite data to predict altitudes that don't result in the formation of these contrails. And what we did there is over a 6-month period, we had pilots doing 70 flights to try different altitudes. And just by doing that, we were able to reduce the carbon footprint of the aviation industry by about 40%. Now that's on the back of partnerships that are rooted in research that's trying to make the world a better place. Tech companies cannot do that on their own. We need the postdocs, we need the PhDs, we need the MBAs to solve these problems. Just yesterday, I was speaking to the MD of a foundation called the Shelter Suit Foundation. It was started by a young Dutch guy, Bas, who was in the fashion industry in Europe. And a friend of his lost his father due to cold exposure at night. He was homeless, this man, and he didn't have shelter, he didn't have a sleeping bag. So he decided that with all the waste in the fashion industry, he's going to repurpose that into these suits that actually turn into, so basically it's a sleeping bag at night, but during the day you unzip it, it turns into pants and a jacket. But this foundation faces sustainability issues. So the MD of this foundation called me yesterday and said, listen, I've been told that you can help with some creative ideas, and I hope I didn't catch you at a bad time. I said, no, I'm driving home, let's go. So we started talking, and I said to you, have you approached business schools? Have you presented this exciting challenge to business schools to say, we've got this incredible NGO that's dealing with the scourge of homelessness around the world and making sure that every homeless person is seen, again, the Sawubona principle, is seen, is clothed, is fed, located, and we're able to direct resources to them. And I said to her, listen, if we can introduce technology, obviously there's privacy issues and identity issues and so on, but if we can bring technology to shed a spotlight on all these people so that we can send help their way, we can send work their way, we can send hope their way, we can reconnect them with families, we can clothe them and feed them, we'll be able to solve the problem. She said, oh, that's amazing. Where do I get these people? I said, look to business schools. That's where world's problems are solved. So my challenge to you as business schools is let's get into a world where we focus everybody on their strengths and their aspirations. What are you good at? What do you love doing? Come here and roll with us. Spend 100% of your time on those things. If you've got 1 or 2 areas of aspiration, we can give you those to focus on. But our business is to make sure that we play to your strength. Our business is to make sure that when you leave here, you are the best version of yourself, because we can only solve problems if we tap into our strengths. And for those that hate X, they will love Y. And Y will be their strengths. And then I think very importantly, we need to influence the world of work. We need to influence performance management systems out there to really train all their guns on letting people focus on their strengths. The world will be a much better place. Progress will be much faster if we all play to our strengths. Focusing on the things you hate, things that sap your energy, but you have to do, is a horrible existence. With that, I want to thank you for your attention and good luck for the rest of the week. Thank you.